tonight we have 4 speakers. Technically I'm a speaker apparently, but 3 great speakers. We've got Colin Rafuse, he's Director of Software Engineering at Proposify. Mohanned Abbas, he comes from us from Freshbooks. He's engineering lead there for developer. I think DXP means developer experience? Yeah, that's what I thought. And Jennie Sanford, who's head of HR at Fellow. All great companies, one of them local, 2 of them have great employees here, but are also external. And I think this actually represents the growing diversity, actually, of Halihax's tech scene. There are a lot more external companies hiring here, but also a lot of great local companies. So I'm super excited. I'm Ian. I do some stuff. One of the things I do is Halihax. Cool. So our agenda, we're late, that's okay, but we're gonna get this kicked off with some talks. Our purpose of tonight's chat is we want to talk about career growth. And career growth is one of those things, I think, in Halihax, for a long time, my perspective is it's been very hard to break out of certain profiles and roles. We've been a very early ecosystem for a very long time, but that's really changed in the last 2 to 5 years as there's been a lot more investment, both in our local startup scene, bigger companies coming in, opening offices, but also the rise of sort of remote work as a result of the pandemic. And those were trends that started pre-pandemic and then were kind of just accelerated by the whole, we all have to be at home for a while thing. And as a result of these sort of this growing ecosystem, it means that people are presented with opportunities that they may not have had before, opportunities to do more than just be an engineer, or more just to be what was an individual contributor, which is probably a word you're gonna hear a lot tonight, which really just means, for those uninformed, a person that has no one that actually they directly manage, but that doesn't mean they don't need management skills. Just remember that. And then you have management, and we're gonna talk about these different tracks, and we're gonna talk about some of the things to think about and how you choose your career. And these are really important decisions because you can make certain decisions that have very large impacts on your long-term career growth, and sometimes they're very stressful things. And I think hearing stories from people, both from, for example, from Jennie, who looks at it from the HR perspective, but also from Mohanned and Colin's perspective, practitioners, is here's the things that they needed to think about as they made progress in their career. So I'm really excited. We'll end this off. We'll have some short talks from them. There'll be little breaks between because we have some lovely folks from BNV Media who are here helping us tonight try to professionalize our operations. You can see it's we're early on, we're just getting our muscles back. We did this stuff remote for a long time, so we don't remember how to do it, like most people. And at the end of it, we're gonna have a little Q&A moderated panel. So we'll give people the opportunity to ask some questions, have a little discussion amongst sort of the 4 of us, and then we'll, after that, mingle. Meet some people, have some drinks, do whatever you want. I can't remember how late we're allowed to be here, so at some point I'll tell you that. Otherwise, I think we're ready to kick it off. But before, I would like to point out that Halihax is a community effort. It's a nonprofit, backed by a federally registered nonprofit, and without some of our sponsors, actually all of these people, we just wouldn't be capable of running the event. These things cost money. And so because of these great companies like Dash Hudson and ResMed and Red Space and Concrete, I could go through all of them. They're here on the slide. Some of the representatives are here. If you see them, say thanks. It's awesome. It helps us do our thing. And that is to try to provide value to the community. That's what we see our purpose is. Most importantly, the purpose is how do we make each individual person in the Atlantic Canadian technology ecosystem more successful by whatever definition of success they have, right? That's our goal. Cool. Finally, there's a YouTube channel, so all this stuff will appear on YouTube. So there's something you're what was that thing that Jennie said, or that thing that Mohanned said with this one thing, or this thing Colin said? It's gonna be on the YouTube, so you'll be able to go back and watch it or share with your friends or whatever you need to do. Just don't turn to memes. That's all we ask. All right, cool. Well, with that, I'd like to introduce Colin Rafuse. We're gonna get his slides up here, and we'll get the show on the road.
Hello, how's it going? Thank you so much for coming out. Really great to see everybody. My name's Colin Rafuse, and I'm a Director of Engineering at Proposify. This evening I want to talk about a topic that is pretty near and dear to my heart, which is career growth, and specifically thinking about the IC or manager tracks and how they relate to one another. What I want to talk about is a little bit about each track, and mainly some misconceptions around those, and also some of the some ways that we can reflect and think about the choice between the two, and some ways we can think about our current personal context to assess the decision in terms of choosing IC or manager. But first, I'd like to set up a little bit about my career journey, because I think this is such a personal topic to each of us, and our experiences have built our careers to what they are. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my experiences to give some context. I started my development career in 2008 as a developer with Cisco Systems. I then went on to Lawton's Drugs for 7 years as an intermediate web developer. I then went to Goal Line as a senior developer, Keeping Roads Safe for about 1.5 years as a senior dev, and then on to Proposify as a senior dev as well. I had the opportunity early on at Proposify to try my hand at the management track. So this was a great opportunity for me to give it a shot and start with one individual contributor, and then I went on from there. Started managing multiple teams, and then actually started managing managers who had their own individual contributors. So that's a little bit about me. I've been in the IC world for quite a while, and then in the last 4 years, I've had a chance to try the management track. But let's dig into the individual contributor path. And, generally speaking, it's going to be a technically focused role. Perhaps a little bit more head down and in the code day to day compared to the management track. Of course, different organizations, individual contributors will look in different ways, but I wanted to focus on some of the misconceptions around the role that I've observed in my time. So one is you have to be a manager to be a leader. That's a big one, and just because you're a manager does not make you a leader. They're very different things. And they impact people in different ways. So that's a big misconception on the IC track. There is no career growth path to senior level roles. I think that's really changed over the last number of years, as Ian was mentioning earlier. Between staff, principal, distinguished engineers, there's lots of ways you can grow your career as an individual contributor. And finally, you can't have an impact on others around you. Of course, we're always having an impact on the people around us every day, but I think as an individual contributor, you can have a major positive impact on people's careers by coaching, mentoring, and things of that nature. So I think there's quite a few misconceptions I run into about staying on the IC track, but also on the manager path, there's a couple of misconceptions as well. So manager, generally going to be more people-focused. I would call it head up as opposed to maybe head down, and communicating day in and day out a lot more frequently than perhaps an IC would be. But some misconceptions I've observed, you'll have autonomy and quote-unquote control. This is not true. As a manager, we're really setting up the environment for people to be successful, to do their best work, and so this concept of having control, it's really once you're a manager, you have, perhaps a lack of control in some ways because you're just trying to set this environment up. Another misconception is you'll have seemingly unlimited career growth opportunities. Sometimes it feels like that from the IC side, but at the end of the day, you could be limited in the manager track because you may not be able to choose a team or vertical that is interesting to you. There's generally fewer managers to ICs, so that's something to consider as well. And finally, things will be easier if I'm in charge, quote unquote. So generally speaking, I think it's sometimes easier to say if I was able to make some of these decisions, things would be a lot easier and we'd be off to the races. But of course, once you're closer to a job and you're understanding all the constraints, the trade-offs and the limitations, it's very challenging, actually. So yeah, I wanted to break those two roles down a bit and talk about the misconceptions more than what they are, because different organizations, the roles are going to look different either way. But what I want to kind of play with here is considering the switch between IC and the manager path. So if we could play with that a little bit and think, if we're an individual contributor, we're currently in the IC role, and perhaps we've been doing this for a little while, we have confidence in our abilities, we enjoy the work, but we also understand the day-to-day and what to expect every day. And we can also find and celebrate the wins that we have as we tangibly finish tasks, ship code, and see how our customer interacts with the product. But the important thing to think about if you're considering this switch is that the manager is a completely different role in many, many ways. So essentially, you're thinking about a different set of skills that you will require every single day. What you do every day is going to look a lot different than when you were an IC. And what success feels like as a manager is drastically different than what it feels like when you're an individual contributor. So if you're considering the switch and pondering it, it's really important to think about the fact that while there are interchangeable skills, of course, it is a different job. So what I would suggest, and I wish I knew this a couple of years ago for my own purposes, but I think self-reflection is really important, and if you're considering the switch, it's something you should consider. And I've got a couple of areas here I would consider reflecting on. So finding your why and what's next. So if you're in this IC track today, you're really going to want to reflect on why you do what you do, why you go to work every day, and what keeps you going and motivated. And then you're going to want to compare that over to the management track to try to understand if you're going to get that fulfillment on the management side, because it is such a different job. And finding out what's next for you, so thinking 1, 3, 5 years down the road and trying to project out and think about where you'd like to be at that time, what career position you'd like to be in, and what experiences you'd like to have had is really important when considering the switch. So finding the why and what's next, and then comparing it from IC to manager can really help you break this thought process down. Your ideal day. So the day is very different between the two. And so as an IC, my suggestion would be to think about what your ideal day would look like, what activities you'd like to do day in and day out. And then you can kind of compare it to the management side to see if you're going to be able to do some of those activities, because of course you're going to want to be doing some of the things you enjoy so that you can get fulfillment out of the job. But I think on the right-hand side here, there's a couple of items that as a manager you're going to be doing a lot of. Of course, depending on your organization, your mileage is going to vary, but a lot of communication, written and verbal, to individuals and to groups of people. You'll be doing more meetings, more than likely. You'll be thinking about projects and teams and progress and metrics for those. Operationally, how is the team functioning? What is their workflow? What is going right and wrong? And you'll also be thinking about human resources types activities like promotions, salaries, how people are working together, things like that. So consider what your ideal day would be like and compare it to what a manager's day would be like, and you can get a better sense of you're going to get fulfillment out of that. As I mentioned earlier, finding the wins is really important for all of us because it's what keeps our forward positive momentum going. So when you're an IC, generally speaking, you would have this tangible impact that you're making by shipping code, passing tests, seeing the customer use that on production and give you feedback. Whereas with a manager, it's a little bit more nuanced than that and maybe a little less intuitive than a tangible thing you can almost touch with you and your team. So as a manager, you need to think about getting your wins through other people. Because you're creating that environment for them to be successful, when they win, you are getting a win. But it doesn't really feel like that. So it's really important to have people around you who can remind you that you're getting the win. It's almost like the win is coming around some corners and is not so obvious to you. So I would suggest thinking about how you like to get recognition in your IC job and how that might translate over to the manager role to make sure you're getting, keeping the positivity up and the energy up day by day. And finally, depth versus breadth of your skill set. So you may recognize this T-shaped skill diagram here where breadth across the top, you have competence in many different activities, and then you may have some depth where you go really deep on one thing and become an expert at that thing. In management, again, from my experience, generally you're going to be living up on that top of the T and not really going too far into the depth of expertise. So as an IC, you may like to be on the top, or you may like to be getting more expertise in one particular thing, but consider when you're in management, you're really going to be getting this wider range of competence in many different activities. And yeah, it's going to be just a bit different and less specialized. So we talked a little bit about the misconceptions and how you could reflect perhaps a couple different ways if you're considering this choice. But I think it's important as well to consider your context, both your personal context and your professional context when thinking about this switch. So I've got this broken down in a few different ways, but they kind of stack up on one another. The first thing I would think about is the psychologically safe team. So do you feel like today you're on a psychologically safe team, and does the cultural values of the company promote a psychologically safe team? Because you are going to a different job between IC and management, you're going to be trying a lot of different activities, and so you want to be in a position where you can try, fail, ask for help, ask for feedback, honest feedback, and essentially experiment. So basically, you really want to assess if you feel like your organization is psychologically safe, and that may help you set the context of if you want to go after this management job or not. The next step to that is the gift of failure. So this one's definitely from personal experience, but you can, yeah, basically further to the psychologically safe team, are you in a position where you can try, fail, and learn again and again, and really take the value from that failure and learn a lesson? Because this is going to be really important in being in a new role and trying all these new skills. You're going to need to capture the wins from those failures again and again and again. And so consider if you're comfortable and in an environment where you feel like you can actually do that and extract those wins. And finally, the growth mindset, which we're probably all heard of. I don't have a dictionary definition of this, but in my opinion, it's mainly about rapidly trying different activities again and again, failing, falling down, learning from those things, and then trying again. So the growth mindset can be a little bit stressful. It can be a lot of work. And so I think it's important to understand going in if you're in a position to take on that growth mindset at the time, if you want to make that commitment to give it a try. But knowing it going in, that you're going to be kind of swimming around in this growth mindset and trying a lot of different things, day to day and week to week, is super important to go in with your eyes open. Basically, after reflecting on a couple of different topics and perhaps building up your own personal context, I would leave you with two main things to think about here between IC and management. You have options, so just because you were to switch from individual contributor to management doesn't mean you can't go back to individual contributor. I've seen this at Proposify several times, done successfully. And it's really important that you understand the organizational context, to talk to your manager and leaders to understand where they stand on this position. But the good thing is you can try it out and you can go back if it's not for you. Of course, your mileage will vary depending on how long you've been in management and how technical you've been, but it's really important to know that you do have options on this if you do want to give the management path a try. And finally, I would suggest thinking about you, but in the future. So basically, our future selves are built from our experiences. So what we did last month, last week, today, that's what's building us up to who we are. So I would consider, again, looking out and thinking about what experiences maybe you want to have had in the future and where you want your career to be positioned. And think about that versus the management track and some of those activities that are going to give you those experiences. Because, I think it's very challenging, but I'm personally very glad that I did it and gave it a try, got into that growth mindset, and basically fell down and kept trying and kept learning. So consider where you want to be in the future, and I think it's worth a shot. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I love this topic so much. I love talking about it. So if you have any questions at all, please let me know, or we can talk afterwards as well. But otherwise, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mohanned Abbas, and I'm from Freshbooks. So today I'm going to talk about a subject that it's very personal to me because it's basically what I've gone through as engineering lead at Freshbooks, and really talk about what I learned from being in such a position. So my job basically started as a developer who stepped into management, which was 5 or 6 years ago, the most obvious chain of events that would happen. You're a developer, you become a team lead, and suddenly you're a manager. It's not really the most attractive thing, but that was like the most obvious path that you would take. And my experience basically was purely starting as a developer. My focus has always been being a developer. So when I started, you can see that I started as developer in BlackBerry, and that was actually my internship from university. But I stayed there for about 16 months, so it almost felt like a full-time job for a while. I actually had more seniority than some of the people that started at BlackBerry, which was really funny. But I gained a lot of experience from there, and I also got to understand a couple of things, which was the IC role, as Colin has spoke about, versus the management role, which was, in the mid-2010s was the thought. Like, if you want to go into leadership, you become a manager. But at the time, a lot of the big companies started distinguishing between the IC role and management. After I graduated university, I actually started working at a company called xe.com. You probably have seen it. It's the exchange rate app. It's fairly popular. I started as the backend developer in xe.com. And then by the time I left xe.com, I became a senior developer. That was about 2 years in my senior development years. After that, I moved to a video analytics company called Vidyard. It's not in the list here, but I spent about a year there. And then I took an opportunity with an interesting startup called Imagine. Imagine got acquired by a bigger company called Innovize, and then Innovize got acquired by a bigger company called Autodesk, you probably know about. And from Imagine, in Imagine I became a team lead, and then in Innovize I became a technical manager. Then I moved on to another startup called ShipperBee. I had the startup bug. I really liked startups. You always feel like you can do a lot of impacts in smaller companies, and it does feel like it. So I moved on to ShipperBee, and that was a really interesting experience. But after ShipperBee got acquired by Purelator, again, another company got acquired by a bigger one, I moved on to Freshbooks. And that's where I actually changed my path from being a technical manager to engineering lead, which is something what Colin also mentioned. You could take the path back into individual contributor if you feel like. Yeah, so this is the interesting part. When we're developers, and I'm not speaking completely in general, but when we're developers, we really like development. We really do enjoy the analytical aspect of things, the maximizing and optimization of code, and the delivery of these incredible products that we work on. But we're told to make an impact, we need to be leaders. So I always refer to Colin's speech before, because it makes a lot of sense. You feel that, okay, to make an impact, you need to be in leadership. To be in leadership, you need to go into a leadership position. Leadership position is management. That was from engineering starting probably in the 50s or 60s all the way until like mid-2010s. In the mid-2010s, there was a little bit of a shift. a lot of companies realize that they have a lot of senior engineers. And those senior engineers were not interested in management. They didn't want teams. They didn't want to deal with teams. They did not want to deal with anything related to, one-on-ones or hiring or anything of that. They wanted to deal with product. They wanted to deal with architecture. They wanted to deal with the technical problems at hand. At that time, there was a title called software architect that, like, early 2010s, like even 2007 and a little bit higher, that's when software architect became a very popular title. That's what I wanted to do. And I really wasn't concerned with management. I just did not want to deal with that. I think, like, a lot of us just don't want to deal with, like, budgets and hiring and all of that crap. We just want to deal with really cool software. So at xe.com, my thought was, I'm not gonna care about, one-on-ones or any of that. I'm just gonna try to build an architecture. And then I'm going to present myself as a good candidate for a software architect. xe.com was fairly small when I started. It was about 12 developers. But by the time I was a senior developer, it was about 53 engineers. So at that moment, I was thinking, cool, I can just keep going with the individual contributor. When I moved to Vidyard, Vidyard was a little bit bigger. It was about 75 engineers, 85 engineers. At that moment, you feel that you're not the big fish in the pond anymore. There's a lot more contribution. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna tone down that ambition and actually get more experience. And that's something that we actually don't see. When we stay in a company for a while, we feel like we know everything, and therefore that we have the right to actually get bigger and bigger titles. But then as soon as you move to another company, you realize, okay, I only know 10% of what I really know. That happens with experience. So how did I end up being in management? Well, after Vidyard, I moved into Imagine, and the manager at the time thought I would make a good team lead. Now, a team lead is a little bit of a different role than a manager. A team lead, you are working and collaborating with other people, but they don't answer to you. You can't hire or fire them. At least that's the conventional sense of team lead. Depends, if you're in a startup, you're probably team lead, CTO, manager, whatever the hell, even the janitor, it doesn't matter. But the conventional sense is that you are the technical lead on collaboration. You have a lot of sway in technical manners. You have a lot of sway in how to influence people's decisions, but you're not hiring and firing them, so there's no pressure there. Imagine got acquired by Innovyze. Innovyze had a different approach of things. They actually had explicit designations where they would have principal engineers, and then they had the managers. But because Imagine has such a big impact on Innovyze, the management from Innovyze allowed for a title called technical manager, because they still wanted people to lead people, but they didn't want to disturb the fact that those are also good technical contributors. So I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. What, another hat on my head? That's really, and you have to be aware of that, but this is part of the things that I've actually gained as experience. From that point, I realized that I'm actually really good at communicating the problem, and I'm good at smoothing those rough edges that come from immediately communicating with developers who really want to focus on the technical aspect, and they don't want to deal with, the people side of things. We have to respect people's personalities, right? So I was able to smoothen that path, and I enjoyed that. And I actually enjoyed what Colin mentions is an implied success. As in, when your team succeeds, you would succeed. And I felt that kind of rush that you would get from your team achieving such crazy things is a good thing for me. So that's another point that you have to be aware of as you get more experience, is know what is really comfortable for you, what gives you the rush. It doesn't matter like if you're the director of a company and if that makes sense, or if you're the principal engineer in a company. If that makes you happy, that should be the thing that you should be comfortable with. So when I switched to Freshbooks, they made up another title, engineering lead. But by the way, it wasn't just for me. They were hiring a couple of individuals that were good leaders, but also very good technically. And that brings me into explaining how the paths could be. Before I do that, let me explain a couple of things, by the way. Management is not an easy thing. So in the 2010s, that revolution of the title between individual contributor and manager, a lot of companies had to make sure that when they hire managers, they're actually hiring good managers instead of just people that end up with a power trip. Because that's very obvious that end up happening quite often. People wanted power to make their decisions and to achieve the plan that they wanted without really being concerned with being good managers. So FreshBooks was very aware of that, and the way that they approach management is incredibly empathetic. And you can see the list of things that they try to do to make sure that whoever they hire has a higher empathy than what we would assume, power to empathy ratio. Because sometimes you're like, I need to get something done versus I need to be empathetic of the people that are getting this thing done because I'm not physically doing it myself. I wonder if they should do it themselves, but yes. So it's very important. The other thing is I'm going to harken back on inclusion and making sure everyone's opinion is heard, because that's very central to being a manager. So what do I do in my everyday life, like as an engineering lead, which is fairly managerial, by the way? Every day we're dealing with current problems. So you have to ask, what are the problems? Because sometimes developers will be inside their head. They're actually going to see problems that are bigger than what technically the business realizes what they are. Because they're closer to the ground, they understand how the software works. So they're going to tell you, like, things are going to fall apart. So you actually have to be very aware of that. That's why communication is very important. And then when you ask how we solve the problems, you really need to address the 3 different structures or 3 different paths of solving a problem, because software in any way is not something that is static. It's always changing. Goodness gracious, like in FreshBooks, we have Ruby and we have Python, and someone wanted to introduce Go. That's just on the language part. Like, think about all the different tools that someone wants to introduce. So it's never static. And always, if you're going to go into management, don't think that if someone tells you, this will solve it, I'm like, not forever. Like, probably 6 months, and then things will break. And then make sure that you're building consensus. That's something that we forget. Saying our opinion or telling people what we want to happen is not something that is practical. It is, something that we all hate, which is authoritarian. A lot of developers are very anti-authority because they're intelligent human beings. It's something, part of the conversation that we've had earlier is when you hire really intelligent human beings, you need to give them the place to thrive in. So being authoritarian does not help. So build a consensus and a vision for that consensus. So once you get a common ground, once you have a common goal, try to deliver that way. Otherwise, you're just fighting a battle against your developers, and your developers are going to hate you and probably going to make a coup. You don't want a coup. Not now. the last thing is when you get consensus, action maps are very important because you don't want to make it feel like to the developers there's no definition of done. As developers, we feel like we're always developing, whether it's like this tiny problem or this giant problem, you're always developing. So breaking it down into an action roadmap would allow the developers to feel their accomplishments. You would break it down to the point that they actually are going to sense, okay, version 1.x is done. I can actually take a break, you know? Mentally, I can like tone down instead of it's a grind of development. I'm always making a feature. That's very, very important, by the way. And in modern metric analysis, you know, like velocity metrics and things like that, it becomes very important because that's how you measure the company's progress. When you break it down to small pieces, it feels like the company is actually moving forward. If you don't, you're back to waterfall, and we're back to like 1970s where a bridge takes 17 years to build. Not a good idea. In management, we've made it solid. It's static what the path is, right? We know that like you go from manager to senior manager to director. It's a very static path. We know how it goes. But the exciting thing is in the individual contributor and in some of the hybrid positions. So in the individual contributor, the last 3 years, yeah, like even just since COVID, the idea of a staff engineer and a principal engineer really sprung up. And the reason why like those titles has sprung up is because we talked about it earlier. Senior engineers became more and more senior, and they want to impact the product, but they don't want to impact, you know, the business discussion of things, right? In the individual contributor path, it has become a lot more important than actually the management path. And it's very interesting because developers always thought like management is the path you want to go to. And the scary part of it, there's multiple articles that when developers are being promoted to managers, it's a promotion to failure. There's a couple of really interesting blogs about it where the title is promotion to failure because you get promoted higher and higher and higher until you can't do your job and you're basically a bad person in that position, which is not fair, right? Like developers, as they get more experience, they're actually probably a treasure trove of information and knowledge and experience, and you shouldn't basically set them up to fail by promoting them upward where they're less contributing, because as soon as you move away into management, you're not going to code. You're lucky if you can write 3 lines of code a month. And if you do that, I'm really impressed. But, I mean, yeah, it's very realistic that you don't. So Freshbooks and other companies devised this path where they're like, okay, we really like that you could be an individual contributor, but you're good at playing the team game. Let's introduce like the engineering lead title, which is like a hybrid, right? And that's actually a really good position to be in if you're not sure if you want to be a manager. You want to lead people. You want to also manage their paths. You want to work with them. You want to encourage them. You want to set up an environment for them. But you're not sure if you want to take that on fully. Technical leads or engineering leads are normally where you want to be in. You dip your toes in. If you don't like it, you can go back to individual contributor, and it's a good hybrid path. And then if you really like it, then you can go toward the management path, and you can, you know, do your thing where you're dealing with budgets every day. I'm not knocking Colin's position. I know what that position is. Not a fun thing. You notice that, like, I've been in the industry for a little bit of a while, and from what I learned from being a manager is something very, very important. Coming to it as a developer, I think it's very important to respect your team. you're not better than your team. You just probably have more experience than your team, but you're not better than your team. They probably also know more about the software than you would, so you need to give them that space of expressing their opinions. Secondly, patience is a virtue for a reason. It allows the ideas to percolate. It allows progress to show. Being impatient might become unsympathetic, and also will develop a tension between you, your team members, your cross-team, your other managers. That is not a good thing. And the bigger your company is, actually the more difficult change would occur, and therefore the more patience you need. So just be wary of that. Take a deep breath whenever you're stressed about timelines. And when you are talking about timelines, be realistic. Try to address the gaps. So when you are managing upward, which is when you're talking to your director, when you're talking to your VP, you're talking about the timelines in an incredibly realistic way. Otherwise, they're just going to think that is just easy to do, which is not. Because sometimes we skip testing. So, if everything goes well and testing passes and, I put my leg up this way and then I swing my hand that way and everything works out, it's never going to work out. Give yourself some time, So there are a lot of books and a lot of literature about how much padding you need to give yourself when it comes to timelines and deadlines. And when you're a manager, you really need to, because you're managing individuals. You're not, working on the piece of software yourself. The advice for being flexible early and being assertive late is something that I learned from my boss, in which that when you're having discussions about solving an issue, allow all the different solutions to come in. Let people actually even try them if they could in a minimal amount of time. So someone says like, oh, I would like to try out hooking the database using this kind of library. Cool, if you can spend a day on it to do it, no harm done. As soon as you hit an obstacle, let's try to approach it in a more standardized approach. That way, they feel like you're including them, and then they also feel that there is a timeline that they need to commit to. Being assertive late is actually something they would like, because they want definition of done. You need to get to the point of saying, there's a decision that needs to happen, and this is where you need to make the decision. Shielding your team is very important, because the friction that is between the people that are doing the things that need to happen and between the people that need to answer to the business's requirements, which is VPs, directors, CTOs, are completely differently prioritized. The CTOs want to deploy the features tomorrow. The developers want to do it in the best possible way. The reason I said best, because best could be by a different definition, whether it's fastest, most technologically appropriate, safest way possible, depending on your industry. So you need to be that layer of interaction between upper management and your workers. I'm going to skip the second last one, but the last one is very important. Killing your biases is something in this modern world is very tough to do, because we are in a global world where we have different cultures, different opinions, a variety of wonderful minds. You need to, as soon as a thought comes to your head of dismissing an opinion, you basically bury that thought, because let that opinion, flourish and see where it goes. It might surprise you, like a young female graduate, woman graduate, that's 23-year-old, the first thought would be like, doesn't have experience. No, listen, just wait and listen. Kill that bias, right? A person who might have difficulty communicating in English, just wait and listen. Let the person give their opinion. It's very valuable. And it's very tough to kill biases, by the way. It's very, very tough, because even people growing in, like us, in a fairly thriving immigrant culture, it's very tough to do still. Okay, this is the promo slide. So, FreshBooks is hiring remote. This is something that has happened with a lot of major companies. They've realized that there is incredible potential everywhere. And Canada, from West Coast to East Coast, is just full of potential. And I moved all the way from Ontario to Nova Scotia because I believe that you don't need to stick into the GTA where everything is there. I think we need to expand. We need to make sure that we address all the incredible people everywhere in Canada. So FreshBooks is hiring a lot. All of these positions are remote. We're office optional, as in if you want to go to an office, if you want, I don't know why, but sure, go in office. And we have been incredible at trying to make sure we modernize our approach to promotion. FreshBooks' approach to promotion is something that first time I see it, which is incredibly democratic, where the person's promotion first gets communicated to all the managers, and all the managers discuss the promotion. It is not like, this is my favorite person, you promote them. It's more like, did that person impact your company? That is something that I've seen only once in my previous experience, but I think that modern companies have been moving toward that, and I think that's a very sound approach. Thank you very much. Really appreciate this opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
So hi, everybody. I know some of you, most of you, I don't. My name is Jennie Sanford, and I'm a certified human resources leader. I have about 14 years in HR, which is a little different than our other guests. But I've spent almost the past 5 years actually working directly in Texas for a couple different companies. But throughout my career, I've worked in companies that are like 25 people to 40,000 people. So I've kind of had a wide area of experience, but I love tech, I love SaaS. So that's where I want to stay for the rest of my career. And that's why I like volunteering and doing things with Halihax and other groups. So I'm going to talk tonight about more broadly what skills managers need. Also applicable to ICs. A lot of this stuff, honestly, is more you need to just be really great and successful as a senior, more developed person in your careers. And they're also great reminders if you're already at that point in your career as well. So, firstly, I want you to think back quickly to what has a great manager done for you? Like when you think of the things that a great manager has done for you, what is it that gave them the skills to do that? Because generally, when we think about a great manager, we don't think like, oh, their technical aptitude was just so high that, they helped me that day. Really, what made them a great help to you is they probably supported you when you were struggling or hit a roadblock, encouraged you to think about it in a way that you unblocked yourself, was your rubber duck, that sort of thing. So looking more broadly and conceptualizing what great management is outside of just that technical aptitude that people may have is where I kind of want to focus. And then we always talk about these things that are kind of like abstract, like be a good listener. What does that mean? We all think we're good listeners, but what are some like more direct checklist type things we can do when we're trying to have those skills ourselves and be that good manager or that good mentor or, expert ourselves? So, has anyone here watched Ted Lasso? Anybody? Anybody? Yes. I see some nods. If you hadn't, I am a direct sponsor from Apple TV that you need to watch Ted Lasso. And if you had told me a year ago that I would be into a sports-based show based on Jason Sudeikis being a parody football coach, I would have told you you're crazy. But actually, the more I watch the show, one, it's amazing. Two, he's actually an amazing manager and hits a lot of the amazing thing managers need to be without being like a typical manager and also being like in an exceptionally vulnerable and disarming person. So my presentation tonight, I just thought I would focus around like the Ted Lasso area of management. And I kind of broke down what I feel those are with these 5 things. And I think that hits a lot of the things that Ted represents, and I think we should all aim to represent ourselves. So I made it as a one easy acronym called KSTVI. It's very easy. You'll all remember it. You'll go home tonight and tell your roommates and spouses and everything. KSTVI. And it's a great way to remember like all the skills you need to have as a manager, or like I say, as just a mentor to someone. So sounds great. KSTVI. What does it mean? So within that list, I think all of those things have a few things to them. One thing that I think is often missed in the list of clearly defined expectations or like of management soft skills is clearly defining expectations. And that's one of the conversations I constantly have with managers when they're having a good problem with an employee. So they're like, oh, they're not doing X, Y, or Z, or they're only doing this to this level, or they're not doing how I would do it. Have you told them? And by tell them, I don't mean you need a good job. Have you told them when you do that, you have to do it to number this, during this deadline, with this, like explicit, clearly defined expectations. So what is the expectations you have of them in a task? What is their role in the work they're doing day to day? What is your role as their new manager? What are you gonna do for them, and what do you expect them to do for themselves? Where's the line between those two roles? And how do you guys talk together? I think that's one of the things that is the most missed in a lot of like new manager training is explicitly setting up your expectations for them, gives them an opportunity to give their expectations for you and what your relationship is going to be. A lot of people think you should be nice. What does that mean? Where does it go? What is the clear expectations for the two of you in the role? If you both have expectations, then there won't be any guesswork of who does what, when does what, and what you both need from each other. The second thing is trust and support. Schools of thought about trust are different. I think that you can build trust quite quickly with someone by being the one to put that trust out there first, but I think it's harder to keep that trust too. So making sure that you're building a trustful, honest relationship. How you do that, I think that ties into a lot of the other things like good expectations, strong communication, being open and honest, radical candor I'm a big fan of, if you know what that is. So keeping that trust ongoing, making sure that you're consistent with how you talk to them, when you talk to them, what you talk to them about, giving them those negative feedback moments if you need to, and then recognizing when they trust you and thank you for that trust, or thank them for that trust, thank them for making things work, and notice those to make sure that you acknowledge that they're trusting you, not just that you trust them. When you're a manager the first time, it's always hard to trust, and I think you have to be very conscious of it and make sure that you are putting out way more trust than you think, and thanking people when they trust you back. Vulnerability, I think, is it's this concept that we all kind of get shied away from if we've ever had a negative manager ourselves. But when management shows you that vulnerability themselves, it really helps you be more vulnerable. So the more vulnerability you put out as a manager, I find the more vulnerability you get back from employees exponentially. So making sure that when you have those moments where you don't know things or need to learn things or not sure, say, I don't know. And of course, as a manager, there's some stuff that you can share with them and then other stuff you can't, of course. But being vulnerable and saying, I don't know, I have an answer for that, but I don't know if I can share it with you at this point. There's reasonings for this. I don't think we can talk about them yet, but you've established that trust, so you can be vulnerable with them, communicate that line of your relationship, and also tell them where you're at with things, I think is very important. Sharing your experiences is another strong way to be vulnerable. When they fuck up, tell them about your biggest fuck up. When they have things that they need to learn, share how you learned it if they're conscious of it. And also, a big thing that is becoming more prevalent and I think is great is sharing your emotions. You don't have to be a rock just because you're in a business relationship with them. Of course, those emotions should kind of be within one standard deviation of normal in a business world, But making sure that they see you're a human too will go a long way in making sure that they feel welcome and included and that they can be themselves at work too. Accountability, that's probably the most common but communicated in different words in most management trainings. But making sure that when you're expecting accountability from them, because we expect accountability from everyone, that you're taking just as much, if not more, accountability for the things that happen. So we all make mistakes. Owning your mistakes and saying, that's on me, I didn't tell you that, I missed doing that, I told you the wrong information, and make sure you do that publicly. So it's not just between the two of you, but take accountability if there's something that didn't happen and you're at fault, or something that did happen and you're at fault, making sure that it's publicly seen, that's on me, and that's not on my employee. Maybe even do it sometimes when it's a shared responsibility, because that shows them, again, the vulnerability and also makes them feel more like you're approachable and more like you have their back and keeps that bond going. Bringing solutions to them is obviously a big part of being a manager. They want you to remove some roadblocks when they have them. Most people, especially if they're in a bit of a specialized role, are already to the point in their career where they're used to that concept of, they're not going to their manager and being like, I don't know how to ABC. They're gonna say, I'm having a roadblock with A, B, and C. Here's the solutions I tried. I've thought about doing this, but that's gonna cost more. It's gonna take more time. What do I do? You know, that sort of stuff. So obviously listen to what they got, but bring them solutions to their roadblocks, even if it's just something simple so that they can think about it more. Taking the feedback that they give you. It's more common now to do 360 type reviews, but absolutely solicit that feedback all the time with your employees. You should probably be having one-on-one meetings with your employees all the time. Ask them every month when you have those meetings, how am I doing? What have I not done that you need me to do? What's next that, you know, I think I'm missing and I think you need to tell me, stuff like that. Follow through, obviously extremely important to trust because these all loop together. Making sure that you deliver on what you say you're gonna deliver, and if you can't, explain to them why. Big with the follow through is resolving conflicts. One of the biggest things I think a lot of people make early in their career is that if a conflict comes up, and by conflict, I mean anything. Someone's not doing their work, two coworkers can't get along, this department can't talk to this department effectively, anything small. Resolve those conflicts early. They will fester into larger wounds. They will be a bigger deal to deal with. And if you had just stepped in early, depending on when you think that's appropriate and talking to your employees and just resolving it like that, hey, I noticed that there's a conflict with X and Y. Can we just have a quick chat about that right now and we'll figure it out? 15 minutes, done. If you resolve those conflicts early, they won't grow into bigger things, and it'll actually take you less time to do it all overall, even though everyone's instinct at first is like, I'm gonna see where this goes, I want them to deal with, I wanna, give them the freedom. Absolutely, but make sure that you have the mindset that you're resolving that as quickly as possible, because sometimes you stepping in and resolving those conflicts, still give them space, but sometimes you stepping in and just nipping it in the bud will save everybody time and stress. Empathy. Talked a lot about. I think everyone has a different definition of what empathy is, so I've broken it down into 4 things. Listening to people, understanding what they're saying, make decisions together since they are probably coming to you with a problem that they want your assistance with. Sometimes they just want you to listen, and that's cool too. So make sure when you're doing your listening and your understanding if they want you to propose solutions or they just need someone to talk to about it. If they just need someone to go to and be like, I'm really frustrated about this situation, and someone to like talk it out and someone to rubber duck with. So yes, make decisions together, but first make sure you're hearing what they need you to help making that decision with. Is it actually solutions or is it actually just a sympathetic ear? And the last part of being empathetic is I think we're all humans. We all come from very different backgrounds, like Mohanned said. We all have unconscious biases. We all have thoughts about what the world is. We all have good days and we all have real bad days, real bad weeks, real bad months. I'm like 3 months into not even be able to like focus at work, okay? So, we all have those moments in our lives, and making sure that when they come to you with problems or when they are the problem or when there's something happening that you remember, hey, that's a human behind that frustration. I know them, we have an established relationship. Something's happening here, let me help them with the root of it. So that's kind of how I think you and your employees should act and behave, but there's always like best practices, like habits we should have, right? So the ones that I think are the most important and are more like checklistable than is having one-on-one meetings. Shameless plug for the company I work for, Fellow. We're great at one-on-one meetings. We actually have a software, free to use, Teams under 10. That's really good that if we're managing meetings, really good on one-on-one documentation. You can tag people, you can assign action items. You have that documentation follow through after each meeting. So if you as a new manager immediately establish the rapport and the expectation, we're gonna have one-on-one meetings. You're gonna lead the meeting as the employee. You're gonna tell me what you need out of this meeting. We're gonna have a bit of structure. You come with notes. It sets everything up amazingly. Delegate to them. Harkens back to trust. You gotta have that trust, and you probably gotta put it in your head before you feel it in your heart. Make sure that they're helping you. You will not be able to do it all. You will always take on more than you think. Well, you think you could do it, and then you can't do it because you're working till 6 or 7 at night. So you have to give them clear concepts of what they need to do, and then just trust it's gonna get done. You just gotta let it go. Just let it go. Just take it out and put it out. They're gonna do it. They're rock stars. They're gonna do it for you. Taking personal inventories regularly about what your strengths are and what your strengths aren't. Recognizing those. Knowing when you're giving to employees what they need and what they don't. All of that, making sure that you're getting better just as you're coaching them to get better. Likely you probably have a manager too, and you're still having one-on-ones with them even if you are a manager. So they can definitely help you with the feedback on those things too. Setting healthy boundaries is sometimes hard. You do sometimes get into a trap. If you're promoted to a team leader or manager, you were coworkers with all these people around, and now you're the one that has to kind of be the boogeyman in some situations. So it's kind of a one-way street that you should kind of allow them to share whatever they need to communicate within reason, of course, but you're going to hear way more about their personal lives than you're going to share with them. You have a manager, you can download that stuff too. You have a therapist, or plug for EAP, someone you can talk to if you're having issues. That only goes up, right? Those issues only go up. It's not their burden to take on. Make sure that there's that healthy boundary, because when it comes time to do the hard decisions, it's going to be much easier to separate the person from the hard decision and make the best decision. Sometimes that best decision isn't the best for them in the immediate future, but what's best for the company and for you probably is the best for everyone long term, even if it's a difficult situation right now, because you don't want things to fester. You don't want things to linger. You want to put them on the easiest path to the success in their life, not just the success in this company. You want to be a mentor to people, and luckily, usually in engineering teams, like the other two have talked to, there's opportunities to set people up with mentors that aren't you as well, so they can have a more robust relationship, but there's probably always something that you're going to kind of have to be their mentor about. And that goes back to the vulnerability and sharing your failures and sharing your successes and your stories and that sort of stuff. Respecting their privacy, again, that goes back to the healthy boundaries. Sometimes you're going to want to know why they're doing things. You're going to want to know why they're sick. You're going to want to know why they're upset. You're going to want to know why their partner called 9 times today if you work in an office. Respect their privacy. They'll share with what they need to share with you, and also that goes the other way. Things they do share with you, make sure that you're not going and sharing that information to everyone. There'll be circumstances that you probably do have to share that information with some people. Sometimes HR, if someone's spouse passed and they need some time off, you're probably gonna redirect them to HR and have that conversation with them like, hey, this happened in someone's personal life. So make sure if you think you do need to share something, you check in with them and be like, thank you so much for sharing that. I can see that that's gonna be a problem. Do you mind if I just talk to HR, the CEO, whatever it is, about this, and give them a little context? 95% of the time people say yes to that, and will appreciate that you checked in about that. My last thing is notes, and I will say this is a cautionary tale for myself and many other people, because I talk to a lot of managers in a lot of difficult situations. Take notes. Take notes of everything. Be almost insane with the notes. You will forget. I guarantee you will forget. This is like the waitress that comes to you and thinks she can remember the 20 orders at a table and then comes back and says, you had the spaghetti, right? And you had the gluten-free pizza. So you remember things at first, but they start to pile up, and you will never regret those 90 seconds of taking some quick notes about the circumstance after. Also, there's legal implications too. If something becomes bigger, you have notes. You can take the notes however you want. Pen and paper, Google Doc, Fellow, shameless plug, any way you want, okay? As long as you have them in writing, email them to yourself, whatever it is, have some notes. The other area that I think is really important to have some notes is personal things about your employees. Again, you will forget their wife's name. You will forget why their dog is dying. All of those things that you want to make it seem like you are listening all the time to them and hear everything. Take some notes, and then you have those when you need to send them flowers for something, when you can congratulate them because their kid just graduated college. And frankly, I do this for dating apps. It's great, highly recommend it. Take notes about everything. What soda they like, what dessert they like, what their mother's name is, where they grew up, everything. Doesn't have to be creepy. You don't have to tell anyone. It can be secret notes. But take those notes so when the CEO comes and says, I heard they broke their leg, what can we send them? You're not sending them donuts when they've been on a gluten-free diet for 3 months. Easy enough, right? So that was everything for me. If you have any questions for me, honestly, add me to LinkedIn, DM me, happy. I'm on the Halihax Slack. Shameless plug for my side hustles too. So I'm big in the wedding biz right now. So if you want to get married, I'll marry you. And then also I have a really cool business basically doing audio guest books for events. So if you want to like have a retro phone and leave messages on it, it's really cool. Just trying to promote it. So I'll give you a steep Halihax discount too. So yeah, go watch Ted Lasso if you haven't too. Thank you.